Hello everyone and welcome to my updated deck profile for Shiranui Premium. A few cards have become tournament legal since the last time I showed this deck, and I'd like to go over those changes, as well as give a shorter deck profile for people who just want something quick to watch to know what they should play in tournament. Let's get started. First up is our starter, Stealth Dragon Madoy. This is the only starter we can play in this deck because the crest has to ride on a Stealth Dragon Madoy, and the overdressed version only draws a card when you go second, so this card is better. Next up is our main ride target, Demon Stealth Dragon Shiranui Oboro at 4 copies. This is the card that lets us go into the History Collection Stride, which is very important. This card also calls a card from the opponent's drop at the beginning of your ride phase, which means that you always have a dominate target. Next up is our secondary ride target, Blazing Demon Stealth Dragon Shiranui Zanki. This card has been errated to be a Demon Stealth Dragon, so it synergizes with all of our deck cards, and it is a good late game card because it gives us 2 dominates, once on place and once when you stride over it, and it also lets us Soul Blast 1 to force both players to call, and we draw a card when we start with it at our ride phase. Next up is our last normal unit grade 3. We have Stealth Dragon Shiranui. This is a good attacker. It gets plus 10k when you have a Shiranui Vanguard. It forces the opponent to bounce a card and discard a card, which is good against tokens because they bounce a fake card and then they have to discard a real card. Goes into Soul, so it generates Soul for later. It does everything we want it to, and it even pitches for Stride. The only bad part about this card is that sometimes you'll have it in your hand and you won't be able to G-assist for a Boro, which will screw you up. Next up is our grade 2s, starting with the most important of our grade 2s, Stealth Dragon Saiyan Geki. There is a 4th copy here. This is the best card in the deck. This card discards to check the top 5 for a grade 2 or less at the beginning of your ride phase, which means that we can use it to find the Crest Maker, which is extremely important. On top of that, it's also a good attacker. When it's boosted, you Soul Blast 1, your opponent discards card if they have 4 or more, which is most of the time. Just a really solid card. We're happy to play this early for pressure, and then we're happy to tuck it into Soul with Unen to get it out of the way so we can play Restanders in the late game. And then next is our primary grade 2 ride target, Shoujo Doji. This card does everything we want. It builds Soul, it checks the top 5 and calls a card, so it helps us find missing pieces, and it synergizes with Unen because we can call cards that we want in our hand and then bounce them with Unen to have in our hand for later. It's also a 10k, so it's a decent vanilla attacker, and in a Protect clan, no card is ever truly dead. You can pitch it to perfect guards, and you can also amplify this with the crest to make it a solid card. Next up is our grade 2 Restanders. This is 4 copies of Furai, 2 copies of Sekie. Furai is, in my opinion, the better of the two. I was persuaded to play this by my teammate over Sekie because I used to think this was better, and there's some merit to both. This one draws a card and gets 10k. This one just gets 5k for every dominate attack you've done, which means that this one scales up harder with certain strides, and this one helps you survive into the late game slightly better. Both are really good. To be honest, it doesn't matter that much how you play the split, so long as you play 6. You can get away with playing 5. I wouldn't go below 5, and I wouldn't go above 6. Next is our grade 1s, beginning with 4 of the Crestmaker Stealth Dragon Seizui. This is the card that makes this deck tier 1 now. Crest is a really broken mechanic when you can get it consistently, which we can because of Saiyan Geki. Mulligan aggressively for this card, put away anything else so that you can G-assist if you don't have it. It's really, really important that you play for getting this card. And on the topic of G-assisting, a reminder, because this came up in tournament a lot that people didn't know how this worked, you can G-assist and still use Saiyan Geki in the same turn, and if you have multiple Saiyan Geki, reveal them all at the same time, and then resolve them one at a time. And you can choose to not pay the cost on the later copies once you find what you need. That is indeed how it worked. I had it confirmed by a judge in tournament. Next up is our secondary ride target, Stealth Dragon Unen. Unen is just a really solid card. When you ride over him, he Soul Blast 1, reveal a grade 3, search your deck for a different grade 3 that can find orders, by the way, and then you put a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck, so you put a trigger on the bottom of the deck. And that helps fix your draws if you have to ride into him. He's the best option besides the crest, and as a rear guard, he's extremely good. As a rear guard, he puts the card he boosted into Soul, and you bounce 2 rear guards, which lets you protect your attackers from your opponent trying to retire them. It helps you build Soul to smooth your attack pattern into the late game, and just overall a really solid card. Next up is our utilities package. We have 2 Katari Kitsune. This discards to search for any demon stealth dragon, so we can find both of our good ride targets. But you have to have the crest, which is fine because we're going to have the crest like 80% of our games. And even without the crest, it still pitches as a grade 3 for stride. Next up is the first new card. We have Stealth Dragon Meigetsu. This card can be pitched as a heal trigger for G Guardians, which makes it a very potent defense card. On top of that, it has another effect. If you call it to Guardian Circle, you remove a heal trigger from hand or drop, and it gets 10k shield for every 2 cards in your opponent's hand, which essentially mimics our best G Guardian, Mori Lord. And on top of that, if you counterblast 1 and your opponent has 4 or less cards, you choose a Vanguard and it gets 5k until end of turn, which means that against multi-attack clans, this combined with a defensive trigger can potentially push you up enough that you can't be hit by the rest of their attacks. So it's replacing our 2 Hanali that we played in the old list, because this is more relevant in more matchups than Hanali was. In theory, the counterblast might bump us up in power enough that it serves as a pseudo Hanali by preventing multi-attack. That part is undetermined, and hopefully we can iron that out in testing, but at first glance this is relevant in more matchups because it's relevant in every matchup, and just seems like a better card in general, and it's a stealth dragon, so we can find it off Shoujo Doji, and that might matter because then we can bounce it with Unin. Overall, I'm excited to see how this card does in the meta going forward. Having more G Guardians is really good. It also makes me wonder if we should be playing 5 G Guardians, but I haven't gone that far yet. Next is our orders. First up is the new order, Bracing Angel Ladder. This card is making waves in Standard if you've been paying attention to that format, but if you haven't, here's what it does. You play it, and you draw a card and put this into Soul. Your Vanguard gets 5k, and then until your opponent's next turn, till the end of your opponent's next turn, all of your units can't be chosen. So all of your opponent's G Guardians that kill a card in play, or other defensive plays they have, won't work on your restand turn. So you go into this with Sukamura Khan, or with the second Rine, and your opponent has no outs to survive. In theory, they could still hit defensive triggers, I suppose. Just overall really solid. It also is good when we can't draw Unin because it can protect our restanders from being targeted, which means that they'll have to attack them if they want to kill them, which is good for us because our late game is generally better than most decks. Next is Elementaria. This is the best perfect card in the game. It's a 1-card perfect card if your opponent strides, and is also a way to beat various guard restrict combos like Oracle Think Tank and such. And then the trigger lineup. This is just standard triggers. 4 of the stride crit, 4 of the draw crit from the history collection. Because we're playing Shiranui, we get all the effects, and the soul generation is really useful to make sure we can continue restanding. 4 heal triggers, 3 grade 3s, 1 grade 0. The grade 3 heals are excellent at preventing early rush, and they can also be pitched for stride, and the grade 0 heal can countercharge our soul charge, which is good for making sure we have enough resources to kill our opponent. And then lastly, 3 draw PGs and 1 Dragon Empire Overtrigger, because this is the best Overtrigger for this deck. The restanders all trigger on Vanguard Swing, and they're not once per turn, so if we hit Dragon Empire Overtrigger, we can do all of the restanders again. That is it for the main deck, so let's go to the G Zone. First up, we have 1 copy of Harmonix Messiah. Harmonix Messiah is a staple for Premium right now. You must play this. This version is also legal for play. It's been errated. Harmonix Messiah gets you a Guardian Shield when you go second, which is a very good card. And against Link Joker, it helps you unlock all your units, and it also damages you and draws you cards against decks that are trying to damage deny you. Next up is our History Collection Stride, 2 copies. This card is very good, and it helped push this deck into meta relevance. It builds a GB quickly, it gives us 2 protect markers, and the on-hit is your opponent discards 1, which is very potent. It doesn't have any other stipulations. It's not once per turn, so if you hit Dragon Emperor Overtrigger, you can make them discard again. Overall, really solid. Next is our main Stride, 4 copies of Rine. Rine says counterblast 1 and turn a card face up, and your opponent calls 2 cards from hand and then dominates them. And that doesn't choose, so it gets around resist. And then it gives 10k and a crit at GB3, so it's usually giving plus 15 and a crit, and then the crest will make it give plus 20 and a crit. which makes any relevant cards they call a 2-card guard. And if they call triggers, then they're going to have less cards to guard with in hand later. Uh, really strong synergy with the Crest. Really strong synergy with Furai, because it'll mean that if you ride Zonky and then play this, you'll be getting 4 dominate attacks, so Furai will be plus 20. It strips cards in their hands, restricting their guard options. Just very solid card in general. However, it is vulnerable to counterplay from protect markers in hand and quick shield and guardian shield tickets, because those do not count as rear guards in their calls. They cease to exist, and thus you don't get the dominate swings. Next up is our other main stride, Sukumurakan. This card binds all but 4 cards in your opponent's hand for the cost of Counterblast 2, and then gives those cards back to them at the end of turn. So you go into this, you put them down to 4 cards, and then they can't physically guard everything you have in play. You go into this late game when you have high amount of power from the Crest. You go into this when they have too many protect markers or quick shield and guardian shield in hand, and thus Rene would do nothing. And if they don't keep those cards in hand, they will get bound, and then they will cease to exist in the bind zone. They're gone forever. We play 2 of this because in matchups where they play protect markers, we usually just go into this twice instead of going into Rene, and it's just a very solid play. It's hard to survive, and with Bracing Angel Ladder, the odds of them being able to make a defensive play to kill a Restander to reduce the number of attacks they have to guard is 0, and thus this card gets even more potent. Next up is our Utility Stride package. We're playing a single Mukuro. Mukuro lets you dominate the Vanguard and attack their entire board, so it's a board wipe. Good when you know you can't kill and you just need to build resources to survive another turn. It doesn't cost Counterblast, so it's good when your opponent's damage denying you. Good against decks that have very annoying rear guards that we have to deal with, because your opponent will be forced to spend cards to guard them or lose them. And also is good against Mega Colony when you fail to re-ride. You go into this and you can dominate their Vanguard and at least get some drive checks. Next up is Yatsuka Lord. This is a Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, and you choose 3 cards with different grades from their drop, and then your opponent chooses whether to call those. Well, you don't have to pick cards at different grades, but you should be picking cards at different grades for a reason I'll explain. Your opponent chooses whether to call those. If they do call them, they discard a card for each one, and if they don't call them, then you draw a card and you give your front row 10k, which means with Restanders, you're getting a very high power attack turn. If they discard, they don't have cards to guard your Restanders. And with Crest, they're kind of in a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario. And the reason you pick different grades is because it's a bluff. Your opponent will assume that you have Mizukaze, the guard restrict guy, and they will choose not to call the cards out of fear of getting guard restricted. And thus, you will punish them because you never had it and you just wanted the most amount of power in card draw. Then next is the GB8 Stride. This is Rokushiki Rakan. He is a very potent late game card. If you play a lot of G Guardians, which theoretically we can do more consistently now because we're playing 2 grade 1s that can be pitched for G Guardians, then you can Counterblast 1 or Soul Blast 1 anytime your opponent guards, and they have to discard 2 cards. This means that they typically will run out of cards by the 2nd or 3rd attack, and you're a 5 attack deck plus 1 dominate swing with this card. So that means they will usually die. You play the super late game, they run out of resources, and there's no way out. In theory. Hypothetically, if they G-Guardian, they get around this effect, or if they play Elementaria, they get around this effect. So you need to be mindful of what's in your opponent's hand before you go into this stride. And then next is the G-Guardians. We've got 1 copy of Gendo Kurikan. This is just a generic +5 if they have 3 cards in hand, plus another 10 if they have 6, which means it's a 30k shield. You just go into this when you don't want to spend resources and you just need shield value. Then next is Gehorikan. I always have trouble with G-Guardian names. This one lets you Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, and dominate a grade 1 in the back row and move it to Guardian Circle. So you can take away a booster or a utility card or a Hanli that they've left in play. You can move it to Guardian Circle, and then your opponent loses power on another attack, and potentially this shuts down 2 attacks because of that, because it can make something else not hit. Overall, just a generically useful card that we can't go into that often because it's resource intensive, so we only play 1 copy. And then 2 copies of Moray Lord. This is the best G-Guardian in the clan. Counterblast 1, you get 5k shield for each card in your opponent's hand. Usually they'll have 6 or more cards, which means that this will be an absurdly high shield value. It's essentially a perfect card. On top of that, if they have 4 or less cards, you draw cards, so even when they have only a few cards, it's still good. We play 2 because we want to go into this usually every time we G-Guardian, and we're only going to get so many G-Guardians a game. that's it for the G zone. Here's the crest, protect markers. Make sure you play some number of protect 2 because your opponent will occasionally be playing a deck that damage denies you and you just want to rush them down, like Fenrir Control, for instance. And overall, not much else has changed in the deck besides the addition of Bracing Angel Ladder and that grade 1. I think now we could consider playing a 5th G Guardian. I've mentioned that in the previous video that I would probably cut Yatsuka Lord for it. This card is also somewhat suspect. In tournament, I only used it once, and it did win me the game, but it almost didn't win me the game because it's vulnerable to G Guardians. So these two cards are the ones on the chopping block. We kind of want some kind of unbeatable late game scaling card, so we probably would play Drachma if we wanted to cut this, but I think this card is still fine in the slot. So this is really the weakest card, and if we're going to cut it, we can play Zashiki Hime, I think is the name of the G Guardian. The G Guardian that turns another G Guardian face up, which would build more GB, which will synergize with this card, and will potentially give us enough crest power to kill our opponent when they're not expecting it. And overall, I'm excited to see what the new cards do. Bracing Angel Ladder, I think, solves a lot of the deck's weaknesses. I think it's better than playing Forbidal, so now I think playing the Guard Restrict package is even harder to make work because we can't play Forbidal because we want to play Angel Ladder. And I think it also means that if you were already leaning towards this version of the deck, that you should be all the way in on it. The only other major consideration that we need to be concerned about is that this card might be unnecessary entirely. A list topped in Melbourne, I think it got first place, so congratulations. Playing a similar build to what I played in Houston, but they were playing no defensive cards. They cut their Hanalies to play 3V Shiranui, and it's entirely possible that that is the correct answer. Playing fewer grade 1s means that we're less likely to brick on crest because we can G-assist more often, as well as giving us a better early aggression package because V Shiranui is the best early attacker before we're going into restand turns. And it's entirely possible that protect markers and card draw make it so that we don't need to be playing anything in this slot. And to be honest, the Hanleys were kind of underwhelming in tournament. I used it exactly once, but they're there to save you from problem matchups because you never know what you're going to play instant premium. There's always somebody who's going to bring Murakumo or something like that to an event, so you should be prepared for it. And the question is whether this card can help us survive in those matchups enough that we don't need to play Hanley, because this card is better than Hanley generically, or whether we just need to give up on those matchups and say that we can't beat them unless we get lucky, like by hitting defensives, and so we shouldn't try to beat them. That's what we'll find out in testing, but this is currently what I think you should be playing in the deck. We'll see if the deck evolves further for the rest of the BSF season. I look forward to seeing it along with the rest of you. And also, keep an eye out. We're going to be posting some test gameplay sometime in the next week on this channel. Me and Eugene, the player who went 10-0 with hamsters, should be uploading something soon. Thank you for watching this video if you made it all the way to the end, and have a nice day.